Good morning and welcome. I'm Celeste and this is my channel, Celeste Creates. Welcome today for the first in a series of beginning quilting videos that I announced recently. Today I have the first few steps that we're going to cover, and I just really hope that this will be fun, this will be helpful. Y'all gave me such a great response when I announced this. In the comments, y'all were just all excited and buying fabric, so I'm really excited to get to do this for you. And I just hope it's a great experience. And so let me get started with a little bit of introduction. So I know I've introduced myself on this channel before, whether that's been in a floss tube or and I'm sure I did some introduction again on my 1-year floss tube anniversary, or here on my QuiltyTube videos. But I have been quilting for about 20 years and I'm self-taught. My mom taught me how to sew, but I started, so I was probably 10, 11 years old. And I think I've said before, I didn't do a whole lot of sewing when I was young, but picked it back up when my first son was born and taught myself how to quilt. I figured I knew enough about how to sew a straight line, pretty much. And this was back, of course, in the day before YouTube and tutorials online, and so I got a book from the library and I figured out how to make a quilt. Like I said, if I could sew a straight line, I think I could do this. So over the last 20 years, I've made hundreds of quilts. I've made huge quilts. I've made a lot of quilts that you can, use on the bed or on the sofa, lap quilts, twin size, tons of baby quilts, table toppers, you name it, I've made it. Wall hangings, they're all over. I love making quilts. And so my hope here was to just really share some of what I learned over the past 20 years of quilting and of keeping up with the quilting industry and what's kind of new and exciting out there. I did a video recently, which thank you also for all your great comments and just reviews on that it was really helpful. But I did a quilting, what I consider the essentials for quilting, because I, like everybody else, would like to have all the gadgets, all the neat things. They're just so much eye candy, so many fun gadgets and rulers, and you just want to buy it all. But I wanted to show you in that video that you don't really have to have all that stuff to make a quilt, and that there's ways to be creative and create your own supplies sometimes. And so I'm really thankful for the response to that video, and I'm excited to do this series on quilting. I do not profess to be a quilt expert. There are the quilt designers, the fabric makers, the book writers. There's a whole world of quilting out there, and most of them are far more experienced and talented than I am. But I feel like if I can help just give some basics and make a little contribution here and have some fun while we're doing it, then that's what I was hoping to do. So again, not an expert, have done a lot of quilting, and so I guess this is my version of let's begin quilting. So as usual, if there's any questions or comments or things you're not clear about as I go through this series, please feel free to comment below and ask your questions, and I will respond to those. Also, feel free to email me at any time. My email is in the drop down box below, and I'm always happy to get an email and respond. So I think the way I have this divided is into 5 or 6 separate videos. This first video is going to cover pressing your fabric, cutting your fabric, and kind of sorting your fabric and preparing it for piecing. And then the second video will be about piecing and so on and so forth. We'll work through the different steps. So I know it's taken me a little while to get from the point where I announced that I was going to do this to the actual first video, but getting 2 kids back and off to college has been consuming a lot of my time, and right, we're all just doing the best we can and life happens. So I'm here, and hopefully in that gap of time between my announcement and this first video, you've had a chance to gather your supplies, some of those basics from my basics video, as well as your fabric. So I just want to remind you that I invited my friend Annie from The Proper Stitcher. Her YouTube FlossTube channel is The Proper Stitcher, and I invited Annie because she loves blue and white. I invited Annie to make this quilt along with me. So all the videos will be here on my channel, but you will be able to see Annie following along, and she has the same fabric, and so we decided it would be fun to do this together and share it with you. So you can find her both on Instagram at The Proper Stitcher, and then also here on YouTube with her FlossTube videos, which are a lot of fun to watch. So I know a lot of you were able to get the actual fabrics that I had shown in the announcement video. I did get a message from the owner of the shop on Etsy. I think it's Cottage Couture fabrics, and she was so pleased that so many people were coming to her shop to buy fabric, and was excited to know that I had mentioned her. And so some of you may actually have this same fabric bundle of 8 fat quarters, and some of you may have chosen your own. But this is where we're going to get started. And so I chose this fabric bundle because I love blue and white. Blue and white has always been a part of my decor. That's my iron. Blue and white's always been a part of my decor. I love blue and white plates. I love cobalt blue glass. I love just blue is probably my favorite color, so I have always incorporated it. And you can probably see even of my quilting fabric up here, I think I have mostly the biggest stack is my blue fabrics. After we flooded it in Harvey back in 2017 and had to redo our downstairs, I got to incorporate blue paint finally in my dining room and some bathrooms. I have a blue pantry door, so I love blue. So I want to share with you first, before we get started, one of the very, very, very first quilts I ever made. I think the first quilt I put together, and I'll have to show that to you on a QuiltyTube sometime, was a rag quilt that I made. I remember going to the local quilt shop that is not here anymore and picking out the fabrics. They were wovens. They were all plaids and stripes and warm colors. Probably would never choose those today, but I chose those, and I did a rag quilt, which I don't think I'll ever do again either, because I did not enjoy snipping all those seams. But I will show that to you in another video, and it's probably the most used quilt in the house. And then I got myself a pattern, and it's called Yellow Brick Road from Atkinson Designs. And if I'm not mistaken, it's still available out there, Yellow Brick Road. And I made a baby quilt out of it first, but the first real honest to goodness quilt that I pieced for myself was from that pattern, and it was probably a lap size, and it was blue and white. So I remember going to the same quilt shop that was there and picking out these blue and white fabrics. I had seen a blue and white quilt in their shop. They didn't have the kit anymore, but the lady there helped me pick out similar fabrics. And I did this Yellow Brick Road quilt pattern. Very easy, rectangles and squares. That's still probably my favorite way to quilt. And I love this quilt. This is the only quilt I ever had professionally quilted. I guess I could only quilt straight lines, and I thought this was the way I needed to do it. So I had somebody locally quilt this for me, and it's beautiful, but I've never done it again because I taught myself how to free motion quilt. So these are all blue and white fabrics, and you can tell here, you know, you got some dark blues, some mediums, you got some whites, and so I love this quilt. Beautiful border. That's one of my favorite blue and white fabrics. I might still have a little left on my shelf, and I backed it in this beautiful blue and white. So that's a great lap size quilt. I'll try and insert a full picture of it at the end, but this was my first real one, and it is still well loved today. So that'll give you a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of insight as to where we're going. And I'm wearing my Quilt Nerd, hashtag Quilt Nerd shirt today. So I felt like that was appropriate for our video. So now I think I'm gonna pause and kind of regroup here, and we are gonna get started pressing and talking about how I get my fabric ready. Everybody's going to do it differently, but this is how Celeste does it. All right, so I'll be right back. All right, so before I actually show you what we're going to actually show you the process of ironing, I'm going to need to move the camera around a little bit for that. I just wanted to reiterate that you will need 8 fat quarters. It could be this exact bundle. I know some of you got that. It could be another bundle that you've chosen. It can be, I showed this on the intro video, it can be 8 scrappy fat quarters that you love, or 2 colors or 3 colors from your stash of fat quarters. But this is a small quilt. This will end up being in the 4 foot range. And I did that not because this can't be a bigger quilt or that we couldn't make a bigger quilt, but I felt like it was going to be the easiest to accomplish and the easiest to demonstrate with, especially once we get to the free motion quilting part of the video. So not a huge quilt, something you're going to be able to you can maybe make a couple different layouts with it, but definitely a table topper or a small baby quilt would be a beautiful baby quilt, or something that you can drape on the back of a small chair. Like I said, I have quilts everywhere. I'm always finding new places to put quilts, big ones, small ones. So these are our fabrics. And then I've had a lot of questions about what pattern are we using. And I decided not to use a pattern per se that somebody else has produced, because I felt like if I did that, I really felt like I needed to be collaborating with them, and felt like I would need to be having their permission. I don't know if that's true, but I had some ideas of my own, and at first I thought, well, we'll just do squares, but now I think we can do a little more than just squares put together. And so I don't have a pattern. I've been asked, will I share the pattern? Well, yes, I will. It's not really a pattern, it's just my own quilty math that will turn into a quilt, I promise. So I made a test block, and this is what the block looks like. So these are the blocks we're going to be making, and the inspiration for this came from a book that you can, here, let me pause and I'll get that. So the inspiration for this block right here came from this book that I happened upon it at Half Price Books, and I don't really buy a lot of quilt books, and I happened upon this one and was looking through it at Half Price Books, and it was so interesting, and I was so mesmerized by the use of, it says, successful scrap quilt from simple rectangles. So it's not a pattern from this book. I took my inspiration from this, and I did some quilty math, as Lori Holt calls it, and did some resizing, and truly, drew it all out, and calculated the math, which I'm pretty sure I calculated all correct, and came up with this block. And so we're going to make a group of these blocks, and this block is what's going to make our quilt. Okay. All right, let me adjust my camera in a minute here, and we are going to start with our pressing. All right, so I've adjusted the camera angle here because I feel like you don't need to see so much my face anymore, but you need to see what I'm doing. And so this is my ironing surface. I do not have a traditional ironing board anymore. I'm not sure I own a I don't own a traditional ironing board anymore. This is a piece of heavy plywood that someone gave me. It was their ironing surface, and they gave it to me, and I have recovered it multiple times with layers of batting. And this is some of the Lori Holt decorator weight fabric that I covered this with. You know, and I kind of rotate it. It will get brown in the place that I use the most, and then I'll kind of rotate it around and use the other corner. So actually it's rectangular, so two corners get more brown than the others. So this is on a desk. This is desk height, and this is where I do my ironing. I can stand and iron, I can sit and iron, which I love. My machine is just over here to my left, and so I can move back and forth and press seams and things like that. And so this is where I do my ironing. And then this is my iron. Woohoo! I know everybody has an iron. But I think in the quilters world, people are funny about their irons. There are some really expensive irons out there, and I have never owned one. I cannot count how many irons I have been through over the last 20 years of quilting, but it's a lot. I have changed the way I press my fabrics over the years, so what I'm sharing with you today is what I've arrived at. And by all means, everyone does it differently. But I really love this iron. After my last one died, I did a little research because I think the hardest thing is finding an iron that gets as hot as I want it to. So most of my irons have been in the $20 to $30 range. I forget exactly how much this one was on Amazon. But why I got it was it had, you can see that, 1700 watts. So it had a little bit more wattage to it, which I felt like it was just gonna end up being a hotter iron. It is a steam iron. I do not use steam. So I use a dry iron. But it's a pure steam. I'll put an Amazon link. I have an Amazon affiliate link program. I will link that below. But so far I've been actually really, really happy with this one. It's been the one I've liked the best in quite a while. There was a really cute vintage Black & Decker one that I had that was probably my favorite iron I really ever had, and they discontinued it, and I've never been able to get it again. Anyway, this is a nice one, pure steam, world's best steam, but I don't use steam. I bought it for the amp, so I'm gonna click it here so it'll get hot. So a good hot iron, I iron on as hot as I can get it. So I have it on the maximum here for my cotton quilting fabrics. And like I said, once upon a time I did use steam. I no longer use steam because I didn't like how it distorted my fabrics, especially when I was piecing. Maybe it's not such a big deal when you're just ironing your fabric flat. You could use steam. And that's totally up to you. If you really like the way the steam works, go for it. I prefer not to use steam. I usually don't use any starch or other spray. What I have learned is that maybe not every single crease or wrinkle will come out perfectly when I use a dry iron, a hot dry iron. Maybe it's a little better if I use starch or steam, but not always. So I have learned that even though it's maybe a little more imperfect with a hot dry iron, in the end, you don't notice. In the end, it's not a big deal that there's, I'm not saying there's like tons of wrinkles. If I had a piece of fabric that was super wrinkled, and then I might need to do something about it. But most of the time when you're buying fabric, it's not in a, you know, I mean, that's pretty darn smooth. You're gonna have to deal with some creases that come from unfolding it, but it's not gonna make a whole lot of difference in the end. I do not pre-wash any of my fabrics. So to my mother-in-law, who's also been quilting a really long time, that is a foreign concept to not pre-wash fabrics. It is not something I have ever done. I don't pre-wash reds or blacks or anything. I think how I got there was that, especially when I started using pre-cuts, I realized, well, there's no way I can wash these pre-cuts and dry them and have them still be the same size. So if you buy a charm pack, which is a set of 5-inch squares, and you wash them and you iron them, you're most likely not going to have a 5-inch square left. So if I'm not washing my pre-cuts, then why would I wash the other fabrics? So I do have a couple tricks for when you wash your quilt at the end, but I do not pre-wash my fabrics. If you have any questions about that, let me know, but I will give you some tips at the end when our quilt is put together and ready to wash, or not wash. You may not want to wash this one, but I have some things you can use to help the possibility of any kind of bleed. I really never had any trouble. You know, I made a red and white quilt recently with good quality quilt fabrics from Moda, and it's just not an issue. I think quilt fabrics have changed over the years, and especially I don't use a lot of batiks or what's the other one called? Batiks or whatever the other one is. I don't use a lot of those, and maybe those have more of a tendency to bleed, but for the most part, when you're buying, you know, just quilting fabric like this from a line of quilting fabrics that's not a batik, then I've had no problems. And I'm not talking a couple of quilts I've had no problems. We're talking hundreds of quilts. I have not had any problems. So I think we're ready now. I'm still here. I think we're ready now to start ironing. So what I like to do is I'm going to take my fat quarters and open my fat quarter up. And I know I'm going to be cutting these fat quarters. And so, move my iron over here. This is where it usually sits. On your quilting space here, or your ironing space, on my left side I have my selvage. So I'm going to be cutting this fabric into rectangles, and I'm going to be trimming off this selvage. And so as I iron my fat quarters and I stack them together, I'm putting this selvage on my left side because it's going to be the first thing I trim off. So I lay out my fat quarter. I've got my good dry iron, and I am just going to give that a nice iron. So you can see here that, right, because you can see the, you can still see the crease back here. This is enough, I promise, this is enough. Will you ever see any little folds in your rectangles as you cut them? Yes, but you know what? It's enough, I promise. But do what you think works. As Lori Holt has said many times, and I embrace this fully, you are the boss of your own quilt. So now I take my next fat quarter and I kind of line it up so that it's, because I'm cutting the same things from each fat quarter. So if I had different fat quarters where I was maybe cutting a certain size squares out of these two and maybe another two I'm cutting different sizes out, I'll group them together. So we have 8 fat quarters, and I'm gonna group them by 2s to start with. So I'm laying this other fat quarter out, and I kind of line it up so the selvedges meet, because remember I'm going to be trimming those off, and I kind of line it up. This is my bottom edge, and I'm just going to iron. I'm actually ironing both of those together. And so we're going to be cutting 2 fabrics at a time. If you don't feel comfortable with that, you can cut 1 fat quarter at a time, and that may be something you want to start with. But I'm going to show you about cutting with 2 fat quarters because that's the way it usually happens. So I'm going to move this fat quarter over to my cutting table, and we're going to do that. All right, so here we go. I'm trying to give you the best angle I can for the cutting portion of this video. This is my 36-inch wide cutting mat. It's 36 by 24. This is a Lori Holt Cute Cuts from Riley Blake. Cutting mat, it's 2-sided. My old cutting mat is actually underneath here. I'm not sure why it's still here, but it's a old green Olfa. I do like the Lori Holt mats from Riley Blake, these big ones, because they are a full 36 inches. My old one was not. Maybe Olfa has changed that over the years, but I don't know. So I have my 2 fat quarters that we just ironed, and they are laid out flat, nice and flat. They look really pretty here on my cutting mat. And I think I talked about this in my essentials quilting video, but you need your rotary cutter. I have 2. I don't really have a rhyme or reason as to why I have 2. I think I use one until the blade wears out, and then I'll pull my other one and then change blades or whatever. I like them both. This is an Olfa brand rotary cutter. This is probably the first one I got. I like it. This is a Fiskars brand, and this is the one I'm going to be using today because it has the newest blade. I cannot stress to you how important it is to change your blade regularly. I probably don't change mine enough, and then when I do change it, I'm always pleasantly surprised how much easier it is to cut. So I would suggest that if you do use your rotary cutter and you're finding that it's getting hard and you're really having to work at it, it's your blade. It might not be you. It might be your blade. So give yourself a new blade and see if that helps some. Like I said, I don't do it often enough, and I should. You know, I always like my surface to be well lit. I have lamps of, I have an old Light. I have some other lamps that I've gotten off of Amazon. This is also my favorite height to cut at, and I learned this a long time ago, and maybe I just got used to it. But when you try and cut at a table level or a desk level, it's very hard on your back because you're leaning over. And so I think I talked about how in my other house when I first started quilting, I didn't really have a dedicated space, and so I would cut my fabrics on the island in our kitchen. And so for me and my height especially, I'm about 5'4"-ish, I love the countertop height. And so these cabinets, I have a little set of cabinets here in my craft room that we salvaged, and this is where I do my cutting, and this is comfortable for me. So we've got our fabric laid out on our cutting mat. It's been ironed. We've got our rotary cutter with a fresh blade. And then to begin our cutting, we're going to start with a long ruler. And I know I showed this in my essentials, but this is probably my favorite long ruler. This is a 24 by 6 inch. And they may be 6.5 inch now. I don't know. I have a link in my quilting essentials video for this particular ruler, or one similar to it. I also have a Lori Holt Cute Cuts one. I tend not to use this one. This is good. This is 6.5 inches. But I tend not to use it as often. This is my go-to. And you can see on the back of my rulers, sorry for the lamp glare there, you can see I have little sandpaper dots. And I believe I linked these in my essentials video as well. These are made by either Dritz or, but you can even find them at your local Joann's. These are just little stick-on sandpaper dots, and I have them placed at different spots on my ruler, and they just keep it from slipping around. I know they say that these rulers and the way they're textured, they're not supposed to slip, but they do. So I've always added these sandpaper dots to most of my rulers. I don't think I have one that doesn't have them. And that's been really helpful for me. So I think we're going to get started cutting. Like I said, I have a stack of 2 fat quarters here. Normally I like to cut, it's depending on how many fat quarters I'm cutting in a pattern, and how many different, if there's 8 fat quarters like this, I'm cutting the same thing out of all 8 fat quarters. My preference would probably be to cut 4 at a time. Sometimes, 2 or 3, depending on how many I'm cutting. But if you're not comfortable, start with just 1 fat quarter at a time. Cut 1 fat quarter at a time. I'm going to show you on 2 so you can see how I work through cutting and moving and stacking. Okay? So I think we're kind of ready to get started. Again, if I'm missing something or if you have some questions, do not hesitate to ask me in an email or in comments. So like I said when we were ironing, this side right here on my left hand, is the selvage edge. And we are going to start by trimming that off. And so I like to get about 1 inch. Sometimes the selvedges are smaller, and you can go. And we are just going to use the line on the quilting mat and line your ruler up with it, and we're going to make a straight cut. Let me pause so I can show you. Sorry for the glare there on my ruler, but you can see that I'm about 1 inch from the edge, so that's going to cut off the selvage. I will line my ruler at the top. We'll just pick a line, but I'm going to line it up with the line on my ruler. Sorry for the glare. At the top and at the bottom. Or at the top, sorry, this is the top. You can tell that my line is lined up here. And so of course it's going to be straight all the way down to the bottom. And I'm lined up. And I'm going to trim off this selvage. Okay, so I wanted to be able to show you that up close. So I haven't moved my ruler from what I just showed you. And those sandpaper dots really do help keep a blade closed when you're not using it. And as I cut, I'm putting a little bit of pressure, and especially when I'm making a long cut, I may cut, you'll see me cut a little bit and then move my hand sometimes. So my blade is open. I'm going to start down here at the bottom, and you can see where my hand is on my ruler. And so I'm going to cut, move my hand, cut a little bit more, and move my hand. And that way my ruler has stayed in place all the way through my cut. And I don't always, it's not obviously that slow all the time, but I wanted to show you how I made that cut. So I moved my ruler carefully, trying not to disturb my fabric, scoot it off to the side, and then I pulled off that selvage edge that I just cut off. And a lot of times, I know y'all know that I make things with selvage edges. If the selvage edge has some printing on it, then I keep it and I make things with them. But these don't have any printing, so I'm just gonna toss those in my trash bin that's nearby. Okay, so I haven't moved my fabric. It is still, this cut that I made is still lined up with that line where I lined up my ruler and cut the fabric. I'm not going to disturb it. But I am going to pause here before we start making our other cuts and show you what it is we're actually going to do, what we're going to be cutting, and then I'll get into the rest of the cutting. Okay, so let's take a look here briefly before we continue our cutting at the cutting diagram that I made. So I've written a couple of patterns, and so I'm not unfamiliar with drawing this up. And again, it's some geometry and some quilty math, and we figured this out. So what I've drawn up here is what we're going to cut out of each fat quarter. You can feel free to screenshot this right now, but I will also have the PDF of this cutting chart available in the drop-down box below. So please look for that. You can print off this PDF. Just like you would have a pattern that you've bought, you can print off this cutting guide and use this as your cutting. So I will add that down below and go print that off. But out of each fat quarter, we're going to cut 18 rectangles. So this outline right here that you see, this outer outline, is the actual fat quarter. A fat quarter is usually about 18 inches by 21 inches. Our left side of the fat quarter is this 18-inch side right here. Now, we won't be cutting it, it won't be terribly close. As long as your fat quarters are cut well and they're pretty true to size, then you will have part of the fat quarter that you won't use. And so that's what this white space is here. Inside the dotted line is probably about how much of the fat quarter we're going to be using to cut our squares. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually start, we're going to cut, each rectangle is going to be 3 inches by 5.5 inches. So we're going to have 18 3-inch by 5.5 inch rectangles cut out of each fat quarter. And like I showed you, I'm layering 2 at a time. You can cut 1 at a time. If you're confident, a little more confident, you can try cutting 3 or 4 at a time. I usually don't try more than that because then the blade's just not going to cut through those last layers of fabric, especially if your blade isn't brand new. So we've trimmed off the selvage edge, and now we're going to start cutting our rectangles. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 long cuts on our fat quarter, and then I will show you how we're gonna turn our fabric and cut the 3. Then I'll show you how we're going to turn our fabric strips and cut the rectangles out of each strip that we've cut. So first we're going to be cutting long 3-inch wide strips out of the fat quarter that we've already trimmed the selvage off of. Okay? So I can bring back this diagram at some point, but again, so you know, it's in the drop-down box below. You can print this PDF and have it handy for your cutting. All right? So I think we're ready to go ahead and cut our 3-inch strips. Okay, so we're back to our other camera angle. I hope it's not too different than it was the first time we were here. So we're all learning here, right? You're learning how to cut and quilt, and I'm learning how to do this tutorial as we go along. So thank you for your patience. So we trimmed off our selvage. You've got a nice straight cut over here. I showed you the diagram of how we're going to cut. We're going to cut those long 3-inch strips in this up and down portion, okay, or up and down motion, okay? So you are going to look at your ruler. I know this is basic, but this is the basics of quilting. And this, on my ruler, is the 3-inch line. So I'm going to take this 3-inch line on my ruler, and I'm going to match that up all nice and perfect along that cut edge that we just made. So I'm going to line up my 3-inch line on the cut edge. And I'll give you a close-up of that in just a minute. So I'm going to say that 3-inch line, and you can see how I'm positioning and I'm checking at the top here that it's all lined up, and I'm checking all along to make sure my clean cut is lined up. Right now I am not using the grids on my mat. I'm using the lines and grids on my ruler. Okay, so I have it lined up, and I'm going to keep it nice and in place. I'm going to switch camera angle just so you can see that. Hold on. So again, here is the 3-inch mark on my ruler, and I have it lined up, all the way up. And I'm going to be making my cut. My next 3-inch cut is going to be along this edge of the ruler. So I'm going to set this down and I'm going to give you a little bit different angle on how I'm cutting. Here I am. Okay, this is fun. Y'all are gonna laugh at all my camera angles, aren't you? But I'm still here. Here's my hands. Here's my ruler that I haven't moved yet. But I wanted to show you from this angle my cutting. So remember, this is lined up. The edge, that clean cut we made, is on the 3-inch line. And I'm gonna make my cut on this side of the ruler. Again, I'm gonna place my hand at the bottom because these are long strips and I got to keep this long ruler straight. I'm going to cut a little bit, not moving my cutter until I move my hand again, cut a little bit, secure it up here, and finish my cut. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do, hopefully my blade is good enough. Oop, you can see my blade probably needs to be changed. I thought I changed it not too long ago. So you can see that I need to change my blade. I'm going to move this strip. There is my first 3-inch strip, and I'm just going to kind of move it over to the side. Okay, I'm not doing anything to that. Keep it all, you know, straight. I'm going to line up my ruler again on that cut I just made. I'm actually going to see if my other cutter has a better blade right now. So I'm going to switch to this cutter and see if it'll cut smoother right now without having to change my blade. So I'm carefully lining it up, checking all along. Make sure it's straight. Start at the bottom, cut a little bit, move my hand, cut a little bit, and finish that cut. Now let's see, move my ruler. I lay it down carefully. I don't drag it along. I lay it down carefully. And this one came apart a little better. So I'm moving those, keeping them lined up. I'm going to move it off to the side. Okay, so those strips are all nice and lined up. Okay, I'm just going to finish. We're going to finish cutting this fat quarter together. Let me do another one from this angle, and then we'll switch. And if your blade does feel like it's not cutting all the way through, you just have to press a little harder. So I'm pressing. Okay, let's see how this one did. Still, well, at least you're seeing real world. Okay, watch. I'm going to change my blade, and then we're going to get some really, no snags, nothing. But I'm glad you got to see that, because now you'll know that if you're cutting 2 layers of fabric and you're getting places where your fabric isn't separating, where you just cut, then you either need a sharper blade or you have a nick in your blade somewhere. Okay, and what I usually do with this blade that I've taken off is, I'm sure everybody has a way to dispose of something like this, but I actually kind of wrap it in some scraps of batting, and I actually sew the edges closed and then I throw it away. So I'll do that later, but that's my trick for throwing away my blades. I have some new blades here. Or is it just, no, it's a 2-pack. Woohoo. Carefully. I can cut myself on just about anything. I have 2 cut marks on my hands from beans, cans of beans, ranch style beans. Don't ask me how. These are often kind of oily. They put it, not oily, but they're greased, so you kind of almost slide them apart. So I've got my new blade. I'm going to set my blade down on top of my little piece. I'm going to put, there's only one way mine goes together here. Put my ruler back on, or put the blade back on. Secure this, my little knob nice and tight, and now I have a changed blade, and you watch, it's going to be amazing. Alright, so now from this angle we're going to cut the rest of our 3-inch strips, so three more strips. Line it up, my blade is open, it feels beautiful. I think I actually forgot that I cut, beautiful, cut all my daughter's quilt, my daughter's graduation quilt. See how much faster it's going? So there's no little catches because my blade is cutting through. And I'm lining up my ruler. That time I didn't move it. You can see, that time I didn't move my hand. Okay? Because my blade was good, I was able to hold it in one spot. Because I'm not pressing so hard with my ruler. I mean with my, I'm not pressing so hard with my blade. When your blade isn't dull, then you're, it's like you're not having to work as hard. But again, cut, move it along. There we go. So those are our 3-inch strips. Now this little piece left here is not going to be used in the quilt. So I'm going to actually set these 2 strips. So there's 2 strips. Remember, we're cutting 2 fat quarters at a time. I'm going to set these strips aside because what I love to do with my extra fabric, if I have enough, is I'm going to make my binding strips with some of these extras. So this is enough. This is still a little over 3 inches wide, more than enough for a binding strip. So save that and set it aside. If I'm not going to use it immediately, then I might go ahead and cut it into a 2.5 inch strip or 1.5 inch strip, depending on how much is left, and save that. So you can see now we have 6 3-inch strips. Okay, I am done with this ruler on this step. So I'm going to put my ruler out of the way. Once you get going, you kind of have a rhythm as to where you like your stuff. You know where things are. That's my thing. You can move these sets of strips carefully and lay them somewhere, and that's fine. I'm going to move a couple of these. I'm just moving them carefully so they stay lined up. But even if they aren't perfectly lined up, I'll actually move another one because I'm a little crazy here. But see how I lay them kind of askew so that when I go to pick them up, I'm not having to fiddle with, I know here's a stack of 2 right here. Does that make sense? All right, so here we are. Here is one of my 3-inch strips. So remember, we're going to cut this 3-inch strip now. If you're looking at your diagram, imagine your strip is turned this way. We're going to cut 3 5.5-inch rectangles from each strip. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a different ruler. We're doing 5.5 inch. You could probably buy every ruler out there. I know Lori Holt has a ruler for every size. I don't have all those, so I make use of the ones that I have. I showed you my favorites in my quilting essentials. This one is not big enough because it's 4.5 inches wide. So the one I'm going to choose is my 6.5 inch ruler, and that should be just enough. Okay, so I'm going to use my markings on this, and this is what I'm going to use to cut my 5.5 inch rectangles from this strip. So let me move my camera angle just a bit. All right, so here is my first strip. Now, these edges are nice and trimmed because those are the strips we just cut. This is still not even right here. These are 2 raw edges of the fat quarter right here. So we need to cut a 5.5 inch rectangle. We need to do 3 of them. So to make my first cut, here is my 5.5 inch mark on my ruler, okay? And so since this is a raw edge that I'm going to need to get rid of, I'm going to place it. I don't want 5.5 inches right at the edge because that's a raw edge. So I'm scooting it in a little bit and making sure I give myself enough room for both fat quarters. And I'm going to make my first cut over here. So my 5.5 inch mark is here. It's inside the edge of the fabric because we're going to trim off this little bit. So I'm going to make one cut. Okay, but it's not 5.5 inches yet. Turn my two rectangles carefully, line up my ruler. This time, this is my flush, my nice cut edge. I'm lining it up at 5.5 inches, and I'm going to trim off these little bits over here and toss them. So now I have two 5.5 inch squares, and I'm just going to move those over here. Now I have a cut edge here, and so I can now line it up at 5.5 inches, make a cut, and I'm going to move that over here. Okay, I'm going to gently pull this, keeping it all lined up. I'm going to gently pull it over so it's in front of me. Line it up at 5.5 inches again. Make one more cut. And you have some little squares left over. You can toss those to the side. I like to cut these later and have scraps in certain sizes, kind of the Lori Holt method of saving my scraps. And now you can see from that one strip, I cut 3 sets of 5.5 inch squares. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start stacking. I'm going to stack up the matching fabrics. So these are my cute little florally print, and this is my print with the bunnies. So I've got nice neat little stacks. Put those over here. Toss my scraps aside. And there's my cute little woodland florals, and those are just going to sit right here. And now I'm going to grab another strip. Okay, so now I've moved another strip. Make sure it's all still, your edges are lined up. We're going to come in from the raw edge. I'm not lining up the 5.5. Make a cut. Flip it. This is the only one you flip. And trim it to 5.5 inches. Okay, toss your little scrappy doos. Okay, there's a set. Now trim a 5.5 inch from this cut edge. Trim another 5.5 inches from this cut edge, and toss your little scrappies. Again, I'm gonna separate my layers. Sometimes I pull my fingernails along my, separate my layers with my fingernails. I'm sorting, and I'm going to continue cutting and sorting these 2 fat quarters. Or I'm sorry, these 2 fat quarters, the strips I've already cut. All right, so now I'm back. We're making our very last cut out of the 6th strip that we cut. Right, I have my stack of rectangles that I cut, and I'm just going to be going through and sorting those out. And then what's going to happen is I'll do a little video of me ironing, I guess, of the rest of my fabrics, and you're going to follow the exact same method to cut 2 more fat quarters, then 2 more fat quarters, and then 2 more fat quarters until you've cut all your rectangles out of all 8 fat quarters. And again, if you're doing just 1 fat quarter at a time, then you're going to repeat this 8 times. If you're brave and you want to do 4 at a time, then you will have only done this twice. It's really up to you and what you're comfortable with. And sometimes if you start with 1 and then feel like, I think I could do 2 next time, okay? So I'm going to iron, do a little time-lapse video of me ironing my next set of fabric. I think I'm going to cut 4 this next time. So you'll see me stacking 4 fat quarters and pressing those, and then I will be repeating those same steps on my own, and I will end up with some stacks of fabric. So as you can see, those are my last 2 fat quarters that I finished ironing, and they're stacked here still on my ironing board. And I was pointing and giving a thumbs up because here's a cute selvage that I would save after I cut it off. Too cute. Can't get rid of that. And then let's move over here to my cutting table. There are the other 4 fat quarters that I have stacked up. I just showed you as I ironed. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Laid out, lined up, ready for me to cut the selvage off. And to do my strips like we just did. And then to turn those and cut the 5.5 inch squares. And then here are my stacks. I'm going to continue to make stacks after I've cut, and I should end up with 8 stacks. So let's finish our cutting. So I really just kind of wanted to pop on here again while I'm still finishing up my cutting and say that I'm now cutting through 4 fat quarters. So I'm cutting through 4 layers of fabric and changing that blade. No issues. Cutting through 4 layers of fabric is a dream. I probably could have pulled off 6, but unless I don't think that's not my favorite. About 4 is my max. So you can see it's just cutting super easy. You can kind of see the pace at which I cut, but I've also been cutting for 20 years, right? And so it comes very naturally to me. And I have a rhythm, right? The more you do it, the more you establish a rhythm for yourself, and you just kind of you keep practicing, you keep working through it, and you too will have a rhythm and a way of doing things. And you'll move a little faster. That doesn't mean I'm careless. I'm still checking, but it's just that years of cutting have, I do it differently. So here's my last strip of my 4 layers of fabric, and then I have 2 more fat quarters to cut. And as I cut those, I'm going to show you a couple more little things that may be helpful that I was thinking about as I was cutting. So these are my last 2 fat quarters, and like I showed you when I was ironing, this is a cute little selvage over here. It's actually a pretty wide selvage, and so if I felt like I didn't have a well-cut fat quarter that I was going to get out of it what I needed, or my cut was really close towards the end and I really needed all the fat quarter, I wouldn't try and save the selvage. But since I know I have enough room, I'm going to actually cut it maybe more 1.25 inches, because I know I have the space on my fat quarters. And so you can see this is going to be the selvage that I keep. It's got a little bit of the fabric on it. It's got the real cute little art on it. So I will end up keeping this one in my basket of selvedges. So something that I wanted to show you about when cutting is going to be what do you do, and how do I remedy it when maybe my ruler does slip a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to pull it over on this side so you can see. So I have my cut edge where I just trimmed the selvedges off, and I'm ready to cut the first of the 3-inch wide strips out of this set of fat quarters. And so I was thinking, what do I do, because your rulers do move a little sometimes, and how do you remedy that, or how do you I don't know that you can keep it from happening, but you can do things when you're cutting to help it not happen so often, or that you can fix it as you go along. It doesn't happen as often when you're doing the shortcuts, but it is not impossible. More often than not, the times that you're going to have trouble with your ruler maybe moving a little bit are these long cuts. So let me show you. I showed you earlier how I start here, maybe move a little bit, and then cut up here. Okay, so one of the reasons that is a helpful way to cut sometimes is that if I'm cutting my strip, so I'm all lined up, I know it's lined up, it looks good, I'm starting here, but somehow you can't really see it, but when I stop, I can see that my ruler has moved just a little bit. This way I can inch it back a little bit, pick up where I left off check again, move on to my next cut, my next portion of the cut. So sometimes it really does help when you're doing these long cuts, and especially as you're starting and everything, that if you do it in sections, then you can look correct and adjust your ruler, because unless you're just going wild and crazy all over the place, it's probably not gonna move a little bit. But it happens to me often that I will start the cut, here, and then somehow I'll look up and I'll notice that my ruler is off. So then I'm able to scooch it back in line, keeping everything all neat and tidy, pick up on my cut where I left off, and keep moving that hand up, and I do think that helps. So that's just a little piece of advice there for you. So I'm going to finish cutting this fat quarter and this set of fat quarters, and then I'm going to turn the camera around and we'll chat for the ending. So I figured we could chat a little bit while I'm sorting out my my rectangles. And you can see, like, I've got a stack of 4. I will kind of scrape it with my fingernails, and I normally don't have many fingernails. This is about as long as they get. Even right now they're annoying me and I need to cut them off. But I just take my fingertips or my fingernails and scratch along the edge, and it kind of, instead of trying to flip through things, it just separates it for me, and then I can easily pick up my pieces of fabric that I've cut. And so part of, one of the skills of quilting is actually just some organization. Doing these steps of sorting when you've got a quilt pattern, whatever it may be, sorting things so that you can have things laid out before you neatly, and you're ready to progress with the next step. And so organization is something important, and it doesn't take much. I'm not talking like you have to be a super organizer, but it is helpful to take those extra steps to get things, instead of just having a pile of fabric like this here. Go ahead and taking those extra couple minutes, and it is fun because as you sort, you get to see all your pretty fabrics again. So just taking those extra minutes to kind of sort those out and get ready for that next step. So you can see here, I'm finished cutting, I finished sorting and stacking, and I have 8 sets of rectangles, one stack for each of the 8 fat quarters that we cut. And we cut 18, 6 times 3 was 18. We cut 18 rectangles out of each fabric. You can go back and count your rectangles in each stack, but if you cut properly and kept track of everything, they should all be there. So there should be 18 rectangles in each of the stacks for a total of 144 squares. Or sorry, not squares, rectangles. So now what I'll do is I would stack these on a tray or on a design board or just off to the side. I might, a lot of times I kind of alternate things and stack them up so they're easy to take apart my stacks when I come back to it. Alright, so we did it. Here we have these are my stacked rectangles all cut and ready to be pieced. And I know y'all did a great job. This is where we're going to stop for today. And my next segment will be on kind of how I'm going to choose rectangles for each block. Again, pause. This is a demo of the block we're going to be making. So how I'm gonna choose the way I pick fabrics to make each block. So we'll work through the picking fabrics for each block, as well as the simple piecing and pressing that'll be involved in making each block. So you have all been troopers, and I know we've both learned a lot, and I've enjoyed sharing just my love of quilting with you and the things that I've learned over the years. Again, if you have any questions, or things you need clarified, please do not hesitate to comment and ask a question, or drop me an email and let me know what you need to, what your question is. And again, you can download the PDF for that cutting diagram down below in the drop down box. And I'll try to provide some links there for my iron and a few other items maybe that I showed. But I will link my other quilting essentials video as well. You can go back to that and look at some of the supplies again. So I'm hoping to plan, I'm going to be getting my daughter to school here soon. I'm planning to film the next video in a week to a week and a half. We'll see how my schedule allows. So that'll give you enough time to cut your fabric and get it stacked and take a break and do some other crafting and stitching and quilting in between video segments. And so I just am so happy to share this with you, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to sharing my tips and tricks on the next segment of these beginning to quilt videos. So until then, let me know if you have any questions. Have a fun time playing with your fabrics. That's always the best part. And I will see you in a week to a week and a half, and happy quilting. Bye.